And I'm not singing I Will Survive Today. I know, disappointing. Can forgiveness transform the criminal justice system? Forgiveness, criminal justice. I know there's someone out there thinking, no way. He broke into my house. He took all of my valuables. I can't forgive him. There's also somebody who might be saying, but she tricked me out of $1,000. It was my last $1,000, and I was saving it up for my rent. How can I forgive that person? There's probably also somebody thinking, he hit me. He hit me, and he destroyed our family. Forgiveness? Forgiveness in the criminal justice system? Before we talk about the concepts of forgiveness in the criminal justice system, I want each of you all to just think about a time where somebody hurt you. Think about a time, maybe it was your spouse or your mate, or perhaps it was, a parent or a sibling, or worse yet, your best friend, someone you confided in, someone that you gave your all to, and they betrayed you. How did that make you feel? How did that hurt make you feel? And how did you work to get through that hurt? And how did you forgive that person? When we think about forgiveness, Webster's definition of forgiveness is to stop feeling anger towards someone who has done something wrong, or to stop blaming someone, or to stop feeling anger about something. So let's go back to that time when you were feeling hurt. How did you move from that hurt feeling to forgiveness? Well, I bet one thing that you needed to get over this hurt was you needed that person who hurt you to recognize, truly recognize how you were hurt. And you also wanted that person to acknowledge what they did and how that hurt you. And it also made you feel so much better if that person not only recognized your hurt and what they did to cause that hurt, but also what they could do to help you to get through that hurt. True forgiveness. Now, when we think about the criminal justice system, just raise your hand if you already know how the criminal justice system kind of works. Anybody have some idea? Now, I'm not going to ask you how you know how the criminal justice system works, but just raise your hand if you know a little about the criminal justice system. And so, for those who don't, let me talk to you about Criminal Justice 101. So a crime occurs, and the system works to find that person who caused that crime. And once that person is identified, then there's a system where a formal process begins. That person is usually charged, could be arrested. There's a prosecution that's appointed to represent or to take care of that case. And the prosecution's job is to represent the interest of the state, not the interest of the victim, the interest of the state. And the person who was charged with the crime, we'll call that person the defendant. The defendant is entitled to have an attorney. And that attorney's job is to zealously represent his client. That attorney's job is to make sure that their client is presumed innocent until proven guilty throughout the entire stages of that proceeding. And they're going to hold that system to that burden. So when we think about the criminal justice system, there really are three questions that we focus on. What laws have been broken, who did it, and what do they deserve? And when we focus on those questions, we don't really have the opportunity to think about the harm, the victim, and how we cure that harm. So I want to spend a few minutes talking about a few of criminal cases that most of you probably have heard a little about, some very famous cases. One of them from my alma mater, the Vanderbilt University rape case. Now, this is not what we're proud of. We're proud of all the other many things. But the Vanderbilt University rape case, which probably many of you heard about already. Now, I'm not going to discuss the case or the facts or the things that happened, but what I do want us to focus on is the statements that were made by the victim. When she had an opportunity to make a statement, there are several things that she stated about the criminal justice system and about how it made her feel. One thing she said was, it's hard for me to stand here on display and speak to you today about the impact this has had on my life. The thought of sharing any more of myself that hasn't already been taken from me seems unbearable, and it goes against every instinct that I have. She went further on to say, the attack on me didn't end that day because I relive it in every proceeding and experience additional attacks every time that I am in court. She also stated, since the horror of that night, all I have wanted is for this to be behind me, to be left alone, and to try to live my life in peace. But the process to get to justice has been a never-ending, constant misery that has twisted itself so into my life that I can't even remember what it was like in a time when this wasn't happening. Everything the defendant has done in this case and the media circus surrounding it have been a continuous disruption, repeatedly dragging me back every step I try to take forward. And she further stated, it made me angry because I didn't have a voice and I couldn't say anything. And let's also look at the Stanford University rape case. Very similar circumstances, very similar case. Again, focusing on her statement, the victim stated, I thought there's no way this is going to trial. There were witnesses, there was dirt in my body, he ran but was caught. He's going to settle, formally apologize, and we will both move on. She also said, instead of taking time to heal, I was taking time to recall the night in excruciating detail in order to prepare for the attorney's questions that would be invasive, aggressive, and designed to steer me off course, to contradict myself, my sister, phrased in ways to manipulate my answers. She further went on to say, had Brock admitted guilt and remorse and offered to settle early on, I would have considered a lighter sentence, respecting his honesty, grateful to be able to move our lives forward. And finally, she stated, I also told the probation officer that what I truly wanted was for Brock to get it, to understand, and to admit his wrongdoing. It's clear in both of these examples that our criminal justice system fails in many ways. Our criminal justice system does not allow an opportunity for the harms to be discussed, an opportunity for an ability to figure out how to cure those harms, or an opportunity to forgive. Now, would those statements have been any different if we had a system of restorative justice? Would it have made a difference if we had a system that allows for forgiveness? So let's talk a little about what is restorative justice? According to Howard Zehr, who is the king or the godfather of restorative justice here in the United States, he defines restorative justice as an approach to achieving justice that involves, to the extent possible, those who have a stake in a specific offense or harm to collectively identify and address the harms, needs, and obligations in order to heal and put things as right as possible. So restorative justice moves the conversation from who did the crime and what they deserve, and moves it to questions of who has been harmed, what are their needs, and whose responsibility or obligations are those to fix that harm. So I get it. It's kind of strange sounding. How does restorative justice really work? In a system of restorative justice, when an incident occurs that would normally be a criminal offense, the person who committed the offense, the victim, family members, and members of the community gather together in a restorative community conferencing. And at that conferencing, they discuss the crime. They discuss the causes of the crime and the effects of the crime. And as they're discussing, they come together with a consensus-based plan, a plan for the person who did the harm to cure the harm to both the victim, the families involved, the community as a whole, and for themselves. It's a time for true self-reflection. It's a time for a firm, yet structured and supportive accountability for that person who did the harm, and a commitment for everyone at the conferencing circle to commit to helping that person overcome obstacles and to learn to do what's right. It's a system that works. In communities that have restorative justice, what they have found is that the recidivism rate, or the rate that someone gets that reoffends after they've gone through a program, the recidivism rate is greatly reduced, and the victim satisfaction rate with the system is greatly improved. So let's take Alameda County, California, for instance. They have a juvenile court restorative justice program, and in that program, they have a 91% satisfaction rate for the victims. And also in that program, for the youth that come back through the program, the recidivism rate for those in an 18-month period that have gone through the restorative justice process is less than 20%, which is a stark difference from the 40% of those that come back that have not gone through restorative justice program. So restorative justice in New Zealand is the thing that they do. That's what they do. They don't do a regular criminal justice system. They start off with a restorative justice program. And there are several communities in the United States that have done it as well. For instance, Alameda County, San Francisco, Long Beach, California, and Baltimore, Maryland. And all of those programs, the ones here, are juvenile programs, which makes me proud because juvenile court's always on the cutting edge of doing things the right way. But in these programs, the restorative justice works. And it's defined as, according to an article called Can Forgiveness Be a Part of Our Criminal Justice System that's in the New York Times. Most modern justice systems focus on a crime, a lawbreaker, and a punishment. But a concept called restorative justice considers harm done and strives for agreement from all concerned. the victims, the offender, and the community on making amends. And it allows the victims, who often feel shut out of the prosecutorial process, a way to be heard and participate. Now, you may ask, I get it, I get where restorative justice can work in a juvenile court facility or a program, but can restorative justice work as an adult program? If you read the article, Can Forgiveness Play a Role in Criminal Justice? The answer is yes. We can do it in the adult criminal system as well. I'm going to tell you about one particular case that it has been very successful in. But before I tell you about the case, I need to tell you about my mentor, one of my favorite people in the whole entire world. Her name is Sujatha Baliga. And Sujatha is the director of the restorative justice practice for Impact Justice in California. And they are the leading cutting brand of doing restorative justice. Sujatha, who by herself was a child victim of sexual assault, just had a love for Tibetan ideas, and she worked with children and women who were victims of sexual assaults. And that work led her to law school, and then her own search for forgiveness as a victim led her to become one of the founding greatest people working with restorative justice. And so, because of her work, a family, actually two families, a defendant's family and a victim's family, reached out to her. This family was in Florida, and they were struggling of a murder case. It was a domestic violence murder case. And they wanted to do restorative justice. The father, the article, if you'll read it, says, Anne's face was covered in bandages, and she was incubated and unconscious, but Andy felt her say, "Forgive him." His response was immediate. "No," he said out loud. "No way, it's impossible." But Andy kept hearing his daughter's voice, "Forgive him, forgive him." And from Conor, the defendant, after the restorative justice process was done, stated, "Hearing the pain in their voices and what my actions had done really opened my eyes to what I've caused." And the victim's family, an observation about them goes on to say, the Grossmeyers said they didn't forgive Conor for his sake, but for their own. "Everything I feel, I can feel because we forgave Conor," Kate said. "Because we could forgive, people can say her name. People can think about my daughter and they don't have to think, oh, the murdered girl." I think that when people can't forgive, they're stuck. All they can feel is the emotion surrounding that moment. I can be sad, but I don't have to stay stuck in that moment where the awful thing happened. Because if I do, I may never come out of it. Forgiveness for me was self-preservation. And finally, what they define forgiveness. Forgiveness doesn't make him any less guilty, and it doesn't absolve him of what he did. But in refusing to become Conor's enemy, the Grossmeyers deprived him of a certain kind of refuge, of feeling abandoned and hated, and placed the reckoning of the crime squarely in his hands. Now, I get it. Forgiveness is hard. Forgiveness is a hard thing. It doesn't happen overnight. You have to work to get there. Forgiveness is something that we've talked about since we were little. And, most religions talk about forgiveness. And we even sing about it in some songs. Like, y'all remember Purple Rain from Prince? "I never meant to cause you any problems. Never meant to cause you any pain." Or we can think about the old good Chicago song. You know the one? I done forgot the song. "Hold me now. It's hard for me to say I'm sorry." And then Adele got famous off of her song about apologies and being sorry. "Hello." That's all you get. But when you think about forgiveness, we as a society have to find a place for forgiveness in our criminal justice system. And restorative justice will lead the way. You may not be ready yet, but as Sujatha always says, we'll get there. We may not be ready yet, but we'll get there. Thank you and enjoy your day.